The ghosts of Anzacs will forever haunt this beach, thousands of miles from home. But it was the Ghost Rifle Brigade that spared thousands of their comrades. An invention by a plucky Australian, Lance Corporal Scurry, helped them do exactly that. His effort in saving lives in the crucial final hours of the retreat has been honoured at a service for the 100th anniversary of the evacuation.
In his trench, Bill Scurry had this thought. It occurred to me that if we could leave our rifles firing, we might get away safely.
Scurry's daughter laughs at his notoriety. To her siblings, he was just Dad.
He was just such a wonderful, loving father to us. We had to be very careful not to get under his feet and things like that because he couldn't see properly. He was blind in one eye, and then the shrapnel moved in his head and the other eye went blind too. He only had 15% eyesight in that eye.
Those gathered at Sunday's memorial heard how in December 1915, after a disastrous 8-month campaign and the deaths of more than 10,000 Anzacs, an evacuation order was finally made.
All plans estimated a loss of life of at least 30% in any evacuation, because leaving would be as perilous as landing had been on the first Anzac Day.
20-year-old Melbourne man Bill Scurry, an architectural modeller by trade, had a bright idea. He dreamed up a rifle that would fire by itself as soldiers crept away.
My dear mother, I am sending with this the magazine from my rifle which I left on the parapet at Anzac. It was a good rifle, but I had rigged it for an experiment, so I did not take it down.
So his idea for the delayed action rifle, or drip rifle, was born, using ration tins and water.
Set in fixed positions and with water gradually dripping from an upper to a lower can, which, when sufficiently weighted, dropped and pulled the rifle trigger, the unmanned trenches kept up a sporadic fire day and night.
This would be the final stage of Brigadier General Brudnell White's plan to slowly evacuate 80,000 troops from Anzac Cove and Suvla Bay.
It has been described by some military historians as the best executed military manoeuvre in modern history.
The sound of movement as men marched down the hills, into the ravines and onto the beach under the blinding beams of the Navy searchlights. The men played two up in full view of the Turks, played cricket in the ravines, doubled up and down the supply lines with laden donkeys. Everything possible was done to give the Turks the impression that the army was still in occupation.
Brudnell White's planning was so meticulous, he even gave an extra 100 cigarettes in large tins to every remaining troop. So they would, smoke their fags in the trenches, and again the Turks would see, cigarette plumes and guys chatting in the trenches, business as usual.
Historians are divided as to whether the rifle played a pivotal role or a negligible one.
Scurry's rifle was a great idea, it was innovative, but it was only used in the last 3 hours of the evacuation, that is on the last night. And it had a role in that, and it was there to carry on with the pantomime that the Anzacs were still in their trenches.
In the early hours of December 20, the last gasps of the evacuation, Scurry's invention saved those final 2,000 soldiers who'd stayed back to keep up the ruse.
There was only a thin pie crust of Anzacs in the forward trenches. And of course, when they would leave, going down the valley, it would be quite obvious that there was no firing and that the trenches would be empty. And they were concerned that the Turks would surge forward. So Bill Scurry's rifle came into play here.
The evacuation endures as a masterstroke of military planning and execution, all qualities the ill-fated landing 8 months earlier lacked. As the shots rang out from William Scurry's Ghost Rifle Brigade, the Anzacs, with Hessian sacks on their boots to muffle their exit, retreated, without raising the slightest suspicion.
Nearly 750 members of the AIF died on the day of the landing, the first Anzac Day. Another 8,000 died over the coming 8 months. But on the last day, not one lost their life. Bill Scurry was later awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his efforts in inventing the time-release gun.
The tears were streaming down my face. I felt very touched. Danny would be absolutely delighted, I'm sure.
The evacuees would all go on to see more horrors on the battlefields of the Western Front. At the end of the war, Major Scurry would meet his future wife, Doris Barry, on a ship back from France.
Well, the ship was called the Dunluce Castle because they fell in love on the Dunluce Castle. Every house was called Dunluce after that.
Scurry died in 1963 after being on a field he loved, the golf course.
He was going down the fairway and he had a heart attack. He came back and said to my mother, I was too up and now the buggers won't pay me. And he died. Wasn't that a wonderful way to go?